Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. And welcome to the first public visioning workshop for the Highland Ave roadway improvements project. My name's Tyler Gabrielski. I'm the Director of Streets for the town of Needham. I'm joined up here by Kara Lustig, the Director of DPW, Tom Ryder, the town engineer. Jared Duval is our project lead here, and he's going to be giving the presentation from TEC. And we have Rebecca Clark. Yes. So we have the structure of tonight will be TEC will give a introduction to the project through a presentation that will go over sort of the outline of how we got to this point. This is a this is a project with a long time horizon. The initial contracting for the design started 4 years ago. So there's been a lot of pre-work that's gone into this project, a lot of analysis and study that's been required as part of the requirements from MassDOT and from the Transportation Improvement Program, which Jared will get into. So with that, I'm going to turn it. Oh, and then following the presentation, there will be you see the tables in the back of the room. Each of you should have received a colored ticket. You're going to start at the corresponding table so that we have a decent spread between all the tables. Each of those tables has a portion of the 10% design plan, and keep that in mind because that's important. We're still very early in this process. There'll be lots more opportunity for public feedback and for comment. And at the tables, there will be members of the design team there that will be happy to answer any questions you may have. And then you can write your comments and feedback on Post-it notes and stick them all over that role plan so that we know what you think about the plan and suggestions for what you'd like us to include on this roadway improvements project. All right, I'll turn it over to Jared.
Thank you, Tyler. As Tyler mentioned, I'm Jared Duval. I'm with TEC, serving as TEC's project manager for this effort. Yeah, I'll try to move this over. Sorry. Let's see. How's that? A little better? Okay. As Tyler mentioned, hopefully you all were able to get a color ticket. As one gentleman asked, he asked if it was a drink ticket. It is not. I apologize. But that'll help to kind of keep things in an orderly fashion, hopefully, as we conclude the intro and get into the workshop. We've got 2 hours budgeted for the program. Oh, how's that? Better? So we've got 2 hours budgeted for the program tonight. I'll try to be as concise as possible with the intro and high-level overview of the project. It's 25 to 30 minutes. We'll budget for about 15 minutes of Q&A to the panel, and then we'll get into the visioning session where hopefully we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes at each table, each section of the project. So without further ado, so just going through our agenda tonight, we're going to introduce the team, which we've really already done. We'll talk about the project limits before getting into a little bit of the project history and the timeline to date. We're going to talk about the project goals and then how that relates to TIP project or Transportation Improvement Program project, rather. So we'll explain that process a little bit. And then we'll talk about our design scope and some of the considerations that are driving our design to date. And then certainly after we hear from all of you and move forward in the design process. And then we'll conclude with talking about some of the next steps in the near term over the next year or so. And then beyond that is part of the TIP development or design development process. And really the overarching goal tonight is, again, first in a series of public outreach campaigns to hear what your priorities and your vision is for Highland Ave. So just a little bit about TEC. We're a multidisciplinary firm. We've got 3 offices throughout New England. We've grown to over 85 employees in the past 25 years. And we pride ourselves on being municipally focused. So it's over 80% of our client base are cities and towns. As a former public works director myself, these are the types of projects that we're presenting tonight that really get me excited. Delivering high impact projects directly for the city or town. Some of our key services here you can see are outlined, most of which are represented on this project, but we've done numerous TIP projects with Mass DOT, so no stranger to this process. Our project team, starting with the town of Needham, the project represented by the Needham Department of Public Works, and then Mass DOT, who administers the TIP design development process. But you can see here, we've got a few of our service areas represented, but ultimately the town has the full resources of TEC at its disposal to see this project through. So where is the project? Where are we talking about? Hopefully this is legible enough, but essentially we're talking about Highland Ave, approximate, sorry, microphone. Thank you. Just keep yelling me if you can't hear me. So starting the northern terminus here at Webster Street, where the previous phase of improvements along Highland Ave had ended, and then heading south about 1.3 miles to Great Plain Ave. So again, Highland Ave being referred to as the spine of the town. This is a main thoroughfare. There's numerous, these represent 3 existing traffic signals that'll be slated for improvements, but there's numerous other side streets that intersect here. You can see that there's adjacent T stops, both at Needham Center and Needham Heights, that were within a block of this corridor. So again, it's a main thoroughfare, heavily trafficked, and it's TIP eligible. So this project, the goal is to both improve the existing pavement surface, but there's a slew of other project goals, not least of which is addressing some of these traffic signals as well, lumping that into the overarching project. So. Okay, so here's a little bit of a timeline to date, basically. As Tyler had mentioned, this project's been in the early stages or in the works for a few years now, starting with back in 21 when the town contracted with TEC to initiate this project with Mass DOT. And from February of 21 to May 21, it was in the early planning stages. A road safety audit was conducted at the intersection of Hillside Ave and West Street, which is actually a high crash cluster, top 5% intersection crash cluster in the state. So an RSA it's a road safety audit, as I mentioned. It's a formal review of an existing or planned intersection, basically a safety review. It consists of an audit team that actually goes out in the field and inspects the site. That audit team consists of Mass DOT representatives, the design team, the DPW, local police and fire, any bike and pedestrian advocacy groups that may have been invited. So that was done back in May of 21. From there, we had moved along, we had moved and done an initial, in the summer of 21, there was a preliminary public engagement survey that went out, which was asking of the public to weigh in on general project priorities and goals. So that was an early touch point with the community. And during that time, from May to about October of 2021, TEC was developing the project need form and project initiation through MAPIT. Basically, that's the state's database to accept applications for these projects, essentially. So that was submitted and approved by the project review committee here in October of 21. So basically, that's MassDOT saying that this project, based on the preliminary scope, it scores well. We think that it is a TIP project that can proceed forward. So from there, we did an existing conditions survey of the corridor, was initiated and then completed in May of 2022. And then from really that point for the next year or so, TEC was working through preliminary concepts, essentially trying to build to a point where you see those plans before you in the back there, by way of some alternatives analysis and looking at different typical cross sections that may be applicable throughout the corridor. So that was a lengthy process and some back and forth, kind of an iterative process. And once that had concluded, it initiated or triggered a project scoping meeting with Mass DOT. So where they can kind of, amongst their various divisions, weigh in on that preliminary scope and make sure that the project is kind of moving in the general right direction. From there, we performed intersection control evaluation, and this was done at that Hillside at West Street intersection, the high crash location. So it's part of Mass DOT's pre-25% scoping procedure. is to look at what control strategies may be appropriate there, whether it's a traffic signal, a roundabout, all-way stop control. So that was done and approved in May of last year. And as part of, including the ICE, including a preliminary pre-25% cost estimate in our 10% roll plan that was submitted to DOT for the over-the-shoulder meeting. That's what OTS stands for. So as again, it's another touch point early in the scoping process with Mass DOT to assess where the project's at and get some consensus again from the various divisions of MassDOT, whether it's their highway division, complete streets, utilities, that sort of thing. So it was at that point, based on some of the feedback that we got from MassDOT, that we were at a critical juncture to go back to the public and really garner some feedback before any appreciable design was carried towards 25%. But at that OTS meeting, there was representatives of the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization that really liked the initial concept of the project. So they urged the town to submit an application for funding for their pool of funding under the Transportation Improvement Program. And that was submitted at the end of last year. And that really brings us to this point. Towards the end of last year was really when we started initiating the planning stages for this public outreach campaign, this being the first real meeting to introduce the project. So I've talked about the TIP or the TIP process. So TIP stands for Transportation Improvement Program. So essentially it's a 5-year rolling capital improvement program that is programmed by the regional MPOs or Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Needham falling within the Boston region MPO. These projects, TIP projects, typically address safety concerns, roadway deterioration, multimodal accommodation. So we're talking about bikes and pedestrians, creating accessible roadway corridors, enhancing connectivity, all those goals, and some of which we'll talk about a little later. So one of the key things to kind of point out as part of a Mass DOT TIP project. When it's a town roadway, the town funds the design. It also funds any right-of-way acquisition, which we can touch on and elaborate on in a little bit. But essentially any easements, both temporary and permanent, that may be necessary to accommodate the proposed improvements. But then the construction is federally funded. It's a mix of federal and state funds, but passes through basically Mass DOT, who administers the program. And the design development process is really intensive, and this is only kind of the high level milestones, if you will, here represented. There's a whole lot of subtasks that are kind of built therein. But it starts with the project initiation, which again was completed. We're in the pre-25% scoping process right now. And once we've garnered as much feedback from the public and get some direction as to where we want the design to go, and we get consensus from Mass DOT after they reviewed our revisions to the current plan, we'll move towards 25% design and then continue on from there. And there'll be, again, some touch points that are with the community throughout that process. So what are some of the project goals? What are we trying to accomplish with our design and getting this project included on the TIP? First and foremost, with most TIP projects, you want to try to provide safe bicycle accommodation. So bike accommodations, we're talking about bike lanes, essentially. And there's different means to do that or accommodate bikes. It could be on-road bike lanes. It could be sidewalk level separated bike lanes. And we have some cross sections that we'll show you later on to sort of demonstrate that. We also are looking to upgrade and reconstruct the pedestrian facilities. So we're talking about wheelchair accessible ramps. We're talking about sidewalks. We're trying to bring them up into compliance with the American with Disabilities Act, the Architectural Access Board, and the more stringent PROAG, which is really most applicable to public right-of-way and roadway projects. Traffic calming is also a top concern. So we want to slow people down. We want to slow motorists down throughout the corridor. And there's ways of doing that, but being deliberate through design and geometry of both lane widths. We can narrow lane widths. We can provide potential raised elements at crosswalks or speed humps, all with the goal of slowing people down, making them drive more deliberately through the corridor and enhance safety for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. We're looking to improve operational and safety improvements at intersections. So there's 3 existing signalized intersections that'll receive new signal equipment. We're looking to improve the timing and the phasing, add exclusive turn lanes, in particular at West Street and Highland Ave. And then introduce a new traffic signal at Hillside and West, which again, a high crash location. So some of the goals relative to traffic signals at intersections. We generally want to improve multimodal connectivity to other areas of town. So again, this is a main spine throughout the town, and connectivity to area transit stops, government buildings, town hall, area businesses, that sort of thing. We want our design to be context sensitive. So we understand that there's some old mature public shade trees. We want to give deference to those where we can. Parking considerations and loading and unloading for businesses. So all things that we want to try to be context sensitive to. We'd like to enhance the streetscape and create a more vibrant main thoroughfare through, again, streetscape, landscape design. And the state of the pavement today, it's, there's crack sealing evident. It's in need of a resurfacing or restoration. It certainly will be in a few years or years out when we project that this may be moving into construction. So we're looking to extend the service life of the roadway pavement and improve the stormwater drainage system, particularly in the Needham Memorial Park area, where we know there's some existing drainage concerns. So our project goals and design goals inform our design scope and really what we're tasked to do with the town. As far as we understand that there's recently been rezoning with the MBTA communities. So what we want to do through our traffic signal design or redesign is we want to incorporate recent studies that were done by others last year to accommodate future growth projections as part of our traffic signal design. Again, we want to consider parking impacts. We'll aim to preserve parking to the max extent feasible and practicable while trying to provide bike accommodations and serve the many interests of the project. I mentioned public shade tree preservation. So again, this is a design consideration of ours. Currently on the roll plan, as you'll see later, where we do have mature trees, we've laid those bike lanes out on road to try to eliminate any removal. Again, drainage improvements. So we want to mitigate existing drainage issues, improve the overall system throughout the corridor. As I said, particularly in the area of Needham Memorial Park. Again, bike accommodations, that equals bike lanes. So, for those who currently ride, we want to enhance the safety. And for those that may not ride a bike presently, what facilities would you want to see to do so? What would make you feel safe? So we can talk about that later during the visioning workshop. And then right of way, as I mentioned before, so this is one of the biggest design considerations. Show of hands, folks that understand or have heard right of way or have an understanding the concept of right of way. Okay. So right of way is essentially the town's claim to a public roadway, the property lines, if you will. And you can see here kind of demonstrated in this cross section, it's typically beyond the edge of curbing or edge of roadway. In a lot of cases along Highland Ave, it's at the back of sidewalk presently, or at the face of existing buildings. But essentially the width is dictated by how the road was laid out and accepted. And the county layout here dates back to, I think it's 1865 and 1878. But it's generally 50 to 60 feet wide or so. So the goal is to have all these design considerations and make these improvements while trying to fit it inside of that right of way to the extent feasible, so that we can again limit. We talked about right of way acquisition before. If we need to, for temporary construction means to install a sidewalk that's right at the right of way, we want to try to limit the amount of right of way acquisition that's involved. And right of way drives our cross section design. So this is a cross section here. And you can see some different elements. You got your travel lanes, you've got some buffers and shoulders, a landscaped area buffer between a bike lane and a pedestrian sidewalk. So this is just one option, if you will. And again, we'll have those printed out at the tables. So. In kind of a different perspective here through some existing photos, just to show you what we're kind of up against. as it relates to both right of way. So in this area, looking north on Highland, you can see Town Hall here. That right of way would fall generally to the back of sidewalk. And again, that's at 1865 or 78 county layout in this area. But the goal is trying to accommodate bike accommodations, compliant sidewalks for pedestrians, and fit that within the right of way. And again, serve the many interests of the project really. In a different perspective, you can see just how different, the character or the context of the street is as you move north. In this section here, this would be somewhere where we would maybe opt for bike lanes on the road in the shoulder here, as shown in this typical section or cross section. But you can see here, there's some heaving sidewalks that are not ADA compliant. So again, part of the goal of the project would be to rectify those issues. So all of those design considerations and the project goals, essentially, this is just to demonstrate, and a lot of you already saw this in the back, but that's what's taken us to this point to date. And again, this is a 10% level concept plan. So this is basically the bare minimum that we've had to take it to get Mass DOT's endorsement or PRC approval for this to be a TIP project to proceed. So again, this is a critical point now that we need feedback from the public before we get into real appreciable design. So this just goes to show some of the initial concepts or proposed improvements. I know it's tough to make out here, but we can talk about it a little later. You'll see some raised crosswalks, new traffic signal equipment that is called out for this location, perhaps a raised intersection for traffic calming. So again, some preliminary elements or design elements incorporated into this 10% level concept. So next steps, just over the near term, really throughout this calendar year. We're embarking on this pre-25% public outreach campaign starting tonight. We will have another in-person public information meeting as we move this design forward based on some of the feedback we get tonight. We'll do another informational meeting to the select board following that. And then we'll incorporate the feedback that we get from the public to the extent that we can. We'll incorporate that into the design and we'll present that again to Mass DOT and tell them that, subsequent to all this public outreach, this is the town's priority, the public's priority. We'll incorporate that in the design and hopefully get their consensus and endorsement to move on to 25% design development through the summer of this year. We'll have to do some additional field data collection as part of that effort, some pavement coring, some subsurface utility engineering, which is a pretty intensive process just to get precise locations of all the existing utilities. But we'll do all that work and more, and hopefully by the end of 2025, we'll project to be submitting that 25% design. So as far as design milestones go throughout the entirety of the Mass DOT TIP design process, we're in the pre-25% process that's not represented up here. But like we said, we hope to submit 25% design for Mass DOT review at the end of this calendar year. And then that will trigger Mass DOT requirement for, as you see highlighted here in blue, these are additional touch points with the community. So 25% design public hearing is a requirement that will happen after 25% design submission. Boston MPO takes about 6 months or so in our experience to actually program the project on the TIP. So program it on one of the program years, if you will. So within a federal fiscal year for advertisement. And then we'll proceed to 75% design and permitting. And again, MassDOT's review. And then subsequently, another public information meeting projected then or anticipated then to update everyone before, and then incorporating any feedback at that point as we march to 100% design review. And there could be, additional public outreach at that point. Typically, once you get to 100%, it's not necessarily 100% because you still have another step to march towards final plans, specifications, and estimates that are used for the basis of bidding in procurement of the project. But in that span, essentially, so going back to right-of-way acquisition, This is a process, a lengthy process. It really starts at 25% when we develop our preliminary right-of-way plans. The town will start with title exams of properties. But essentially, once we've got approved right-of-way plans, usually at the 75% design stage, that's when the town will start working with a community compliance officer that is assigned by Mass DOT that really guides the town through that process. So any easements that are needed, any layout alterations potentially that to shift the right-of-way lines that are required, it'll be part of this right-of-way acquisition process. And that usually entails, if there are easements that need to be acquired, there's an appraisal based on the area of that. So an appraisal will be conducted. Property owners will be contacted. There will need to be a vote at a town meeting, typically to authorize the select board to be able to acquire these easements. So that's kind of one of the critical steps in the process that happens early. And then from there, folks can opt to donate easements, or after the appraisal is done, they'll be submitted offers, basically, compensation for those easements. So, but this general timeframe here is based on, again, our experience with these projects, and then kind of projects out an add date out in the federal fiscal year. So 2029, 2030 or so is when the project may be advertised for construction. So there are other opportunities. Again, the goal is to solicit as much feedback as we can. We have a dedicated project webpage linked here, Highland Ave, roadwayimprovements.com. We'll be updating that with more information as we go through the process. We'll post meeting materials and project updates, things of that nature. We also have a link on that webpage. It's also, and I should say that webpage is linked on the postcards that are in the back through the QR code. But we do have an active survey going right now through March 9th. So I had mentioned the initial public engagement survey way back in 21 was more generalized. This is specific for trying to assess bicycle ridership throughout the quarter. So we want to hear about what people's priorities are as far as bike facilities, bike lanes, what they'd like to see, what their priorities are. And again, that's running through March 9th. So I checked it this morning. We had about 145 responses, so which isn't too bad, but we certainly hope to hear from more of you. So with that, hopefully we'll start with maybe 15 minutes or so for a panel Q&A, but thank you.
All right, everybody, this is your opportunity to ask the project team and the DPW folks some questions about anything really, the process, the presentation we just gave, the project limits.
How you doing? My name's Ed Survivor. I'm a longtime Newton resident. I'm just getting acclimated to this project. I happen to be a relatively frequent road biker. Would never set foot in downtown Needham and don't ever intend to on a bicycle. Visited Amsterdam, watched people get clobbered on sidewalks trying to navigate the bicycles. And I'm trying to understand in terms of the funding, is the funding dependent upon this bicycle lane involvement? Is that like a state requirement for starters? And secondly, is there any concern about federal funding drying up? It seems to be a common theme these days. So it's just a few thoughts that I have. And then I didn't see parking listed there as an objective. So when we set these goals, we sort of went from a crash at Highland Avenue and West Street to all of a sudden needing a reformation of all of Highland Avenue. So I'm just one or two questions to think about.
Sure, I can give you a little bit of the background of the project and sort of why we picked this particular project from a town perspective. So there are many intersections along the corridor of Highland Ave that are in need of upgrade, whether it's structurally, so the signals themselves are no longer being supported or we can't get the materials to do it. They're not properly coordinating with each other. The alignment of the intersection is really not ideal. And so we have several of these intersections along this one corridor. the town could choose to upgrade these intersections on a one-by-one basis, probably in the scope of $1 to $1.5 million per intersection. And so the idea was, instead of doing this in a piecemeal process, to leverage state funding under the TIP program to be able to bring state resources and federal resources into the town of Needham and not fund it solely through town tax dollars. So that was the impetus for us starting the process with looking at the TIP. To participate in the TIP, it does require that you meet certain standards that the state sets. For context, the current project that we have on Highland Ave that starts at Webster and goes all the way to Newton Center is a TIP project. In the Needham side, it's probably not as noticeable, I guess, as it probably is in the Newton side, but you'll see there that you have separated bike lanes, you have a wider sidewalk, and you have upgraded signalization through that corridor. And so the advantage of using the state funds is obviously you get resources to the town that don't require town tax dollars to be able to support these items. Some of the downside is you lose a little bit of the control, right? You have requirements that you have to meet in order for it to be a project that is eligible. So the project goals, I would say, were really to enhance the intersections that we have currently to make them safer and more functional. And I would say a secondary goal that we've had, or I guess sort of related, but the Heights general area has been, we've done some updating work in our downtown with parking and traffic signals and bigger sidewalks and street furniture. We really haven't done something equivalent to the Heights. So to provide them some of the business community amenities that you would like in a business area. And then we've also had a goal of redoing the entire downtown. We did one very small section. We currently have a project in order to redo all of Great Plain Avenue. And we originally were intending on doing Highland Avenue with town resources. This would allow us to do the Highland Avenue corridor all the way into the downtown without utilizing town resources. So that was the idea of going for a project. I don't want to prognosticate about anything at the federal level because I feel like that's probably not a wise choice. But typically speaking, infrastructure projects tend to have a lot of support. We have set this project up so we feel like we could do it in segments if necessary and try to take advantage of smaller pots of funding if they become available. So, you know, it's certainly fair to say that at this particular time, nothing is a guarantee. Even getting into the program is not a guarantee, but we felt like it was worthwhile to try to get into this program, to try to get some of these projects accomplished without having to compete with other projects that we have in town.
That's exactly right. So this program has been used in various municipalities throughout the state to really hit those big projects that municipalities have difficulty funding on their own through local sources. So this is kind of our shot to get this really, you know, this is kind of the main spine of the community. In addition to the east-west spine here that we're also working on. So we could have those projects split up over many years and kind of, you know, they may have different teams, slightly different priorities for each one. This is our opportunity to make it one continuous upgrade that hits both the, you know, all of those factors that were mentioned, the pavement condition, upgrading with pedestrian and bike facilities, the signals, and then the connectivity to the completed project beyond Webster Street. So this is a program that is sort of seen as the a really good resource for communities to tap into for these larger projects that you or otherwise wouldn't be able to normally program. So and it also is pre-existing to everything that's been going on. So we don't have any indication that the program's in danger as of now, because it is something that's been around for years, that communities have been leveraging for years. There are a lot of big projects around the state have been funded through this program, but there is a bit of that trade-off where you have to meet those requirements based on ASDOT's policies and priorities. Another thing that I want to mention is just a lot of people have been talking to us about where's the bicycle network in town? How are you building out the bicycle network? It's hard to build out a network when you don't have a central spine to build off of. So this is our opportunity to really to build that spine and then to get connection points to other parts of town that are not currently serviced by bike infrastructure, so that we really can have that option. You know, it's something that you have to kind of envision, that some of these local trips may be doable on a bike that were not before. So that's something that's a priority of this project, and that this project would help us accomplish. So those are all things that you know, that you kind of need to think about when you're thinking about this project, because if without this program, these things might never, or you know, might take years and years for them to all get done the way we want them to.
Hi, I'm Jane Volden from Brookside Road, and I had a couple questions. First of all, what is the projected cost of the design? That's the part that says Needham has to pay for. So I'd like to know what that cost is.
So one other thing to mention is that the current phase of design is also being funded through state allocations through the Chapter 90 program. So as of now, we are not using local funds for design. There will be additional phases of design, you know, that we saw that milestone map. Depending on the allocation, the resources that we have from the Chapter 90 program over the next few years, it may be that additional funding will be requested at town meeting. But as of now, it's important to note that local funds have not been expended on this design to date. As we get closer to each phase, we will have projections on the cost for each task. It's very difficult to project design costs 5 years into the future, 6 years into the future.
But they could be significant, right?
Keep in mind that we're not spending local money on construction. Design is a fraction of the overall cost of construction.
Correct, but the town has a huge elephant in the room with 2 schools that have to be renovated. That's going to cost a tremendous amount of money. So we're not going to have a lot of extra money, I don't think, in the future. Another comment I wanted to make was the residents of Brookside Road met with, I think, the Pedestrian Safety Committee last June, because we were concerned about the lack of sidewalks and also the speeding cars down the road. One of the suggestions the citizens made was to maybe put speed bumps or something like that on the road to slow down the traffic. And we were told that Needham doesn't do that. So I'm curious as to why then you would allow raised pavement in the center of town.
To answer the question about what type of speed control devices that we do and where we may use them for application. Up until last summer, the town did not install any speed control devices that were speed humps or speed tables. We made a change of course when it came to the Webster Street project, as we were looking at doing traffic calming measures there. We had a neighborhood meeting to make sure that the neighbors were in agreement with it, because sometimes they can present a little bit of an extra noise concern related to trailers that go over them. And we were all sort of in agreement that that was going to be a pilot to test out the application in town. And so far it's been successful. I imagine that application will be extended to other areas in which we observe speeds that are above we regularly observe speeds that are above the signed speed limit. But again, we'll have to make sure that we'll have to make sure that they are allocated in the correct application in the correct location, and we'll work with the neighbors in order to do it. So it's very possible that you had that conversation before we broached the subject and really changed our general policy on how we use that specific speed control measure.
Just to address the previous question about funding a little further, the The program I mentioned, the Chapter 90 program, is dedicated for roadway projects and roadway design. So it would not be, those funds would not be, the projects you mentioned would not be competing for those funds. Roadway projects are funded through DPW's budget or this Chapter 90 program. Some communities choose to or have to fund almost the entirety of their roadway improvements and maintenance through that program. In our case, we have strategically deployed it for specific projects and funded maintenance through local sources. The other thing about traffic calming, when we have concepts that we're testing, and as Karis mentioned, prior to Webster Street, we did not have vertical deflection elements like raised crosswalks in town. You want to install them in places that are going to be used a lot, that have wide infrastructure and observed higher than the 85th percentile speed is in excess of the speed limit. So there's a significant volume of people that are speeding. That's not usually the case on residential streets. So it may be that we implement those things in the future on residential streets and on these smaller volume and smaller width streets. But as of now, this is a corridor with a lot of pedestrian activity. So there's a different calculation that's going on there.
If I may add to Tyler's point, the raised elements that are included in the concept, again, 10% level concept at this point, coincide with pedestrian crossings. So it is a traffic calming element, but it is also trying to raise more awareness through the raised element itself, and then the advanced pavement markings and warning signage that there are pedestrians crossing there. So that's part of one of the primary goals of introducing those as well.
Hi, Fred Motor. I have two questions. First is your design trying to take into account the projected higher density, population density, if the zoning change goes ahead? And second, is there a place that we could walk and look at that's like this design so that we could, see what it really looks like?
I can take the part of the first question, but as part of the MBTA Communities Act, we hired a consulting firm to look at all of the intersections in the sort of general area of the zoning, all of which I believe were in the Highland Ave corridor, or the Highland Ave corridor was 100% affected. When they did modeling to look at what the traffic impacts would be, many of those intersections are already at a very poor grade to begin with our current level of development. And they looked at several scenarios. So they looked at one scenario that said no build, but just with regular increase in traffic patterns. One that was like a conservative estimate on build, and then one was for full build out. And even in the no build scenario, many of these intersections were going to be at failing. So regardless of any increase in population density, these intersections do need to be improved in the next few years. That being said, I think one of the goals of the project is try to encourage multimodal transit during this corridor to try to reduce some of that pressure as well in that intersection for people who are sort of taking the 1 mile to 2 mile trips as opposed to pass through traffic. The second thing I will give my suggestion, I think they would have theirs, but generally speaking, the northern section of Highland Ave would be a similar treatment to what we're looking for in most of the corridor here. So if you were to drive from Webster towards Newton, it would be a very similar road profile. But if you want to give other locations as well.
Yeah, in terms of cross-section, and when we're talking about bike lanes and things of that nature, yes, I mean, that would be the idea, is for continuity's sake, is to carry that through to the extent we can. But again, there's some other design considerations such as public shade trees and some of the areas that are more residential that we may opt for a different cross-section through there. We may move the bikes into the shoulders on road, given the priority to trees in that case. So, but generally, yes, it would be trying to lend some continuity from the Webster Street improvements north through this section.
Hi, I'm Christine Urban from Webster Street. And so much of this project is bike centric, right? Either to better serve the current bicyclists or, as you mentioned in the introduction, to try to encourage more people to bicycle. Do you have any volume metrics of current usage? In other words, how many bikes, what percentage of residents are bicyclists? Do you have any metrics of what's now happening so that you could measure success?
Yeah, I don't believe we had, we done some preliminary traffic counts, mostly for motor vehicles, turning movement counts, things of that nature. But again, we're still really early in the process too. So we're trying to get a feel for that through the public survey that's live now. And we can certainly move to, again, I'd mentioned some data collection, field data collection that needs to happen going into 25%. So that could certainly be a part of the protocol as we move to 25%. But I guess generally speaking, it's the old mantra sometimes is if you build it, they will come. I've seen that play out in my previous public works role. People just simply don't feel safe, given the current cross section. So that is sort of a typical mantra. But
I would just add to that the vast majority of the cost of this project is not about bike lanes. So just to be very clear, bike lanes are required as part of the TIP process, but that is not the expensive part of doing a project like this. The vast majority of the cost is going to be on the underground infrastructure. So part of this project is going to improve the drainage in the Highland Ave corridor, because that's obviously an area that we have drainage concerns, as well as it's just a highly developed area. So there's less area for water to percolate. The drainage is, even though nobody sees it, it's a very expensive component of roadway construction. The intersections themselves, the mechanics in them, the realignment, that's also going to be a fairly expensive component of it. So I sort of think about this actually as like an intersection improvement project that then has a top dressing of compliance with TIP. The other thing I would also indicate in this particular corridor, because you have the high school there, we have had questions when we talked about Webster Street about not providing a bicycle accommodation on Webster Street as part of the striping project. And one of the conversations we've had internally is you would have a bicycle accommodation for students who, many of them do bike to school, to get to school safely if we finish this project out. You also are joining multiple public transit nodes as part of this project on Highland Ave. We have the bus, we have the commuter rail, and what you'll actually get is full connectivity between Needham's commuter rail and the Green Line, because there will be a full bike lane developed from the Needham section at the Heights all the way to the Green Line as well. So I think the bike lane is the thing visually that is the most highest level of change from what we currently have as part of the infrastructure, but it's not the main cost component for the project.
if I may add too, so just to expound on what Karis had said, the bike lanes and bike accommodations are typical for Mass DOT projects. I've presented to other communities, and even in my previous role as a public works director, what we typically tell people is, what we hear is, if the road is bad, let's just pave the road. Well, you simply can't do that when you have existing pedestrian facilities, curb ramps that are non-compliant as far as the ADA is concerned. If you're paving a road curb to curb and you're touching these curb ramps, you are required by law to upgrade those to current code. And that drives the cost of the project up. So a lot of times, by the time you consider paving the road, upgrading the pedestrian facilities, that cost far outweighs the design costs that are involved for a TIP project. So if you go the TIP route, you're able to address the pavement surface, bring up the pedestrian facilities, play ball, and accommodate bikes as well, if that's the sentiment for some folks, and then upgrade utilities and traffic signals and all of those things as well. So it ultimately yields a more inclusive, high impact, more impactful project in the end.
But am I correct in understanding that the bike lanes, not any lanes, but some proportion or some big piece of this project is required to get the TIP money?
Correct.
All right, so they set the standards of how much of this has to be bikes.
There has to be the inclusion of bike facilities that meet MassDOT standards. It's not
Okay.
like 10% of the roadway has to be bike lane or anything like that.
Sure, yeah, I understand.
We go through as part of 25% design exception process, basically, the DOT reviews. So we produce a design justification workbook. There's a gold standard for bike lanes, which is to include them separated and away from the motorists, at sidewalk level.
Right.
That's kind of the gold standard. If we can't accommodate that because of right of way or other constraints, we need to justify that to Mass DOT. So as part of their design development process, but yeah, they're definitely looking at biking, inclusion of bikes in these projects.
Oh, my name's Jackie Kylie. I live on Ware Road. I guess I'm concerned, how many people in the town have expressed the interest for the bike lane? Because if it's to get the money from the state, I walk along Highland Ave all the time, a lot of families with strollers and kids. And when you add bicyclists to it, it can make it more dangerous for pedestrians. And I'm concerned as to, is there a strong interest from the town to add the bike lane in this path? Because 145 respondents for a town with about 25,000 registered voters is a very tiny sample. So I guess that's my concern. Are we adding something that maybe the town doesn't necessarily want? It may not add any benefit to the town. I think we would love to have safe pedestrian walkways that are cleared. Our town, for whatever reason, only clears one side of the sidewalks during snowstorms. So it's not that safe during the winter months to even walk in our current sidewalks that we have. They're not well maintained. So I'm concerned that the town's investing this money, even though we're getting some from the state, to add more kind of pedestrian walkway, bikeway that may not be clear and will make the roads even narrower. It's been pretty bad walking and driving around the past couple of weeks with the ice storm. And now we're going to take away more driving space, parking space, and have to look out for bicyclists. And I don't know, I'm just curious as to how many residents really want the bike lanes, and do we lose control in the town for this money to add something that may be a feature that many people don't really want? But I agree, I feel the town loves the pedestrian aspect of the town center, and I would love to see that improved.
So we do get some outreach about what our safe areas we have for people to bike, particularly on main roads. We do have concerns and we have received complaints. Largely it's about kids riding their bikes in the downtown or riding their bikes along Highland Ave. And right now, because we only have one non-road element for them to go on, the sidewalks, they do commingle with residents on the sidewalks. Again, I would recommend taking a walk on Webster Street towards Newton, because that is the treatment that we would be looking at, which is a separated bike lane from a pedestrian amenity. So they're actually two separate lanes. They're not one lane. TEC did do a survey at the very beginning of this study. Actually, interestingly enough, there was a lot of interest in a multimodal path. There was less interest in a bike lane. The multimodal path, though, has that very concern that you're talking about, where you're commingling bikes and pedestrians in the same location. The state was pretty adamant on separated bike lanes as part of our section of the TIP project. And for that particular area, we saw the improvements they were making, I think at 3 intersections and at the bridge, as being a cost saving significant enough to the town that would warrant us accepting a bike lane. I generally think when we talk about this particular project, it's sort of, we have the opportunity to partner with the state, or we have the opportunity to go it alone. And going it alone means probably a several decade long time horizon to have improvements on this corridor. And so I guess there are trade-offs that you have to make when you decide to partner with the state, and some level of control that you do lose because you're gaining their resources, whether they're financial or management, when it comes to implementing the project. But we're talking in the realm of upwards of $10 million. I would imagine $10 to $20 million is what the project cost would end up being.
The preliminary cost estimate with contingencies, obviously, and inflated out to about 2029, 2030 is upwards of 17 million when you include, force account, utility work, and that sort of thing. So
And the vast majority of that is infrastructure improvements that we would want to be making. So I guess, again, we're sort of the public servants coming to you for your opinions on where you would want to spend your resources, but wanted to make this opportunity available to the community as a potential for developing this area, making it safer and making it compliant in a much more rapid way. But there are trade-offs in order to do that.
Yeah, so one thing that I just want to mention, one of the main reasons why some of these treatments are proposed is for pedestrian safety. You'll be able to see some of those elements on the roll plans back there when you go back there. But the narrowing of the roadway and traffic calming is intended as a pedestrian improvement. We're talking as part of this project, upgraded sidewalks, expanded sidewalks, enhanced crossings, traffic signals that are safer for pedestrians and that allow more pedestrian crossing time and a more coordinated pedestrian pattern. So these are, the reason why the bike lanes is a focus at this early stage is because the exact design and profile of the bike lane is sort of the first piece of the puzzle, or one of the first pieces of the puzzle that will, once we have a lot of feedback on that and we know which direction to go into that, other parts of the project we can build into that, off of that. So, and because it's a requirement of MassDOT, that's the reason why we're focusing on it now. As we continue through the design process and we start to focus on other elements as well, there will be a lot more talk about what kind of crossings do you think? I mean, that's something that you can provide that feedback now, but this is not a bike lane only project. There is many facets of it that are improvements for pedestrians, and it's actually one of the primary priorities of MassDOT as well.
I'm Rob Zaletti, 35 Hemlock Street. Regarding the redesign of the street, an example might be that if you want to look at something that may be what it's going to look like, my doctor's office is at 1832 Center Street in West Roxbury. And I've been going there for like 20 years, and they've recently redid the street where they added bike lanes on both sides. So you have sidewalk, bike lane, parallel parking, street, either direction, then parking, bike lane, sidewalk. And it's really different than it used to be. Way they set it up, now I have some trouble parking there because they've taken some of the parking places for buffers or something. I'm not sure what, but I'm not sure if the Needham design would do the same, but what used to be an easy place to park, parallel park, is now not. At least on when I've been there, I have eventually found a spot, but it's more, driving around and looking. So anyway, if you want to see what, I don't know if you're familiar with that section of West Roxbury and what they've done there. Anybody on the board familiar with that?
I'm familiar with it. And I think that's I think that's some of the feedback too we're looking for is like, where do people want, where is parking really important? Where is having wider sidewalk really important? Where is having slower car traffic for people crossing? Where is that really important? So I think it really is to get that feedback about where the values are. The town did do a parking study, I think 3 years ago. Pre-COVID, it was every parking spot in town was sacrosanct and we couldn't touch it. And then COVID hit and we put up these parklets and it turned out like the world kept turning. So we did an analysis of our parking and it found that we have, I guess I'll call it adequate parking, but some of it's privately owned, some of it's publicly owned, and we're still sort of starting that process of trying to sign our lots better and maybe work with private property owners to see if they might, a bank might offer their parking in the evening, which is when we have one of the congestion points. So I think hearing from people about what parking spots matter, where they want access to on-street parking, or where it might not matter. And when you drive by, you see most of those parking spots empty. That's the type of feedback that we're looking for.
I remember, I've been attending some of the earlier meetings and they've said parking's not an issue on that section of town, which they're going to develop. But from my experience on Center Street in West Roxbury, we may lose some parking. I'm not sure this would happen in this design, but again, that should be hopefully taken into the equation, and hopefully parking won't be terribly affected if you go that way. Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Beth Tuck, and I live on High Rock Street. I'm one of the co-founders of the Bike Needham, Bike Moms Needham group. And it really pains me that people feel that they're scared to bike through town. I'm a multimodal use of transportation. I bike to the train, I use the train, I walk, I drive. And I think there's problems for everybody in all those different respects today. And what I see is that I really support this program and leveraging the funds of the state. And for us all to be able to coexist on all these different modes of transportation, because I think if you build the better pedestrian streets or, sidewalks, if you build bike lanes, if you build, ways that people are driving slower through town, they will come. I represent a group of Needham moms who want to bike, but they're scared. We go out together as groups so that we can kind of learn and teach from each other in numbers about how to bike through town. And I'm excited that we're doing this. I think one of my questions is the center of our town. I think like Needham Center is really important. And I see that this Highland Ave project goes through Great Plain. And I know that one of you did mention that that's being covered in a separate project. So my question is, how are we going to make sure that those two projects intersect in terms of making the center of town a place where people want to come, whether on bike, whether by on foot, whether by on car, so that that can all kind of tie together?
So the time horizon on the projects are a little different. So the Great Plain Avenue project, if all goes well, will be completed while we're still in the design process of this project, in the later stages of design. So there will be plenty of opportunity to take what we are moving towards on that project and then figure out how to interlock what we're designing on this project. So both teams are, fully aware of each other's work. They're sharing a lot of the same studies, traffic studies, and information, and projections on both projects. So they will be working in tandem with this project coming in behind and creating that last connection between the Great Plain project and the already completed project north of Webster Street.
Hi, I'm Kathy Carell. I live on Highland Ave. And I'm just curious if our lawns abut the sidewalk, will you be taking any part of our lawn? And if you know at this point, how many feet, or if that's going to happen? How far will this expand onto our properties?
Right. So in the 10% concept plan and laid out on the tables there, generally the proposed improvements fall right to the edge of the right of way, which would be in most cases with a sidewalk to the back edge of sidewalk. Under that scenario, if that's how the design progresses, there would be a need for, again, temporary easements because there'd be some work that would encroach, beyond that right of way. Just to be able to install the new sidewalks and then restore the lawns. But again, this is a preliminary 10% concept. So we'll see highlighted in red, there are some areas where there's proposed layout alteration, namely at some intersections. And there's a section, I believe at the Heights Common, it extends a few feet over the existing property line or right of way, but extends over it's town property anyways. But right now that's not prevalent where the work encroaches on private lawns.
So Jared, could you maybe highlight again when we get to that point and we know that we will need to take some easements or get some and be encroaching, how would that process look so that the residents or the property owners who will be affected are communicated to? I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns is how soon will they know and how will that communication look so that construction equipment just doesn't show up and say, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to be on your property.
Yeah, that right-of-way process, I mean, we can't say now, but once we submit our preliminary right-of-way plans at 25% by the end of the year, we'll have a better idea. And again, but that right-of-way process will play out for most of the duration of the design development. And again, it's more certain once the right-of-way plans are approved for acquisition, typically happens at 75% or so. And then that's at the point where property owners would really be contacted, and then the town would engage the services of an appraisal firm, to assess the value of that easement and have some ongoing dialogue with the property owners.
And there is, just for clarity, there is a clear distinction between a temporary easement where we'll just be there because we need to be on the property to do the work within the right of way, but we'll get that clearance ahead of time and restore it back to the original when we're completed with the project versus a taking of the property because that will now become the new right of way. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate O'Connor. I live on Barrett for 30-something years. Just two thoughts. I was walking at the Fuller Brook over in Wellesley a couple of years ago, and they had a sign up that they had a paved area and it was a permeable pavement, so it could drain. I'm just wondering if we're thinking that way. And the other is there any possibility of when you rip out all of Highland, can you put the utilities underground, which might save us from some ice storms and some wind storms? And thank you.
So I'll let you talk about the permeable pavement. I can talk about the underground utilities. When we talked with the state about paying for the project, we even talked about like drainage, and they asked questions about should drainage be part of the project scope when it comes to what the state would pay for. And we absolutely push back, and you're like, that's the drainage is the foundation of the road. If you don't get that correct, you can't do the rest of the road. So from bottom up, we're looking at getting this project funded. To underground utilities requires the town to pay for those utilities to be undergrounded at, I can't remember the last time we did it, but $1 million a mile, something like that.
It used to be $1 million a mile. I think when years ago, I think it's above that now.
So that would not be something I am sure that the state would pay for, and something that the community would have to raise the funds to do. Professionally, I have mixed feelings as far as I think the main reason people want to underground utilities, one is aesthetic and the other one is in case of weather. I will say we have run into issues with underground utilities in weather events when we've had flooding before. So that didn't really fill me with a huge sense of confidence that it was, a bulletproof solution to underground utilities. And in this particular case, Highland Ave is not an area where we have a ton of tree damage that would take down utility poles compared to other parts of town where we have more trees that are, more mature, established, and right along the utility lines. So it's certainly something we could discuss, but it would obviously add significant cost to the project that would not be absorbed by the utility. They don't pay for it. And it would not be absorbed by the state.
And as far as pervious pavement, it's always an option or consideration. I would say in New England, from a maintenance perspective, it's very maintenance intensive. So you think about some of the snowstorms, any sediment, sand, not that the town may be sanding roads, but sediment works its way into those pores. It gets fouled up. It becomes impermeable pretty quickly. You'd also have to take stock of what the underlying soils are. Typically in more urbanized areas, there may be a lot of fill and things like that that are not conducive. So it may infiltrate that permeable pavement, but then once it gets below that, it has really nowhere to go. So there are some design considerations and constraints there. But it is like what we call a low impact development technique for managing stormwater that could be considered in some areas. And it's also, I should note that there are a few people that do it in New England. So you do end up paying a premium at the onset to install it.
So Jerry Tyler, time for one more question and then move to the tables. I'm just looking at the clock here. And then my second thing is, can you just, I'm sure there's still lots of questions in the audience that they will be able to ask at the individual tables. But if someone walks away tonight and has a question or thinks of something tomorrow morning when they wake up, how do they ask that question or provide additional feedback on tonight's presentation?
So the project website will be the place to go for all information about this project. My contact information is listed there.
Should be, yeah.
I'm happy to you can send me an email. I can connect you. I can either connect you with the design team or send you some information myself. DPW is spearheading this project, so we're happy to answer any questions as they come.
All right, so last question
All right,
here,
last question, and then we'll go to the table.
at least the last acknowledged question here.
Right, the last question of the night. I feel blessed. My name's Ken Buckley. I live on Warren Street, so not close to the area. Two quick, hopefully quick questions. One is the notion of Chapter 90. I think I heard you say, but I just wanted to check. The Chapter 90 can't be used for things like sidewalks. Did I hear that correctly?
I just meant to clarify that funding for building projects, and somebody had mentioned the school projects, that Chapter 90 is not eligible for those projects. It is eligible for projects that include sidewalk.
Right. So the point earlier about being able to put sidewalks on Brookside, Chapter 90 is perfectly appropriate for that, correct?
It's eligible.
Okay. So I just, because my head kind of went boom when you said that. I'm like, what? It made no sense. And now options are always important, I think, in any governmental decision-making process. And one of the things as I sit here tonight, it seems like the goals were already set before we got here tonight, and that those are seemingly unadjustable. And it's a little bit frustrating in the sense that, yes, we want the intersections improved. And if we want funding coming from the state, which we shouldn't be confused, it's still coming out of our pockets. And the more communities that get involved, the more so it's just a direct transfer of funds. But the key thing is that we are now being asked to do the bike lanes because that's a stipulation. I think you said earlier, we're relinquishing control in order to get money. But I wonder if we compared, and I see nothing here in terms of the funding, but I'm curious, you probably can't answer it, but maybe you could send it to the town. What's the funding that the town needs to provide now that we're doing this, what I would consider a more robust project, as opposed to let's improve the intersections and we unfortunately don't get the bike lanes? Like, what are the options? I'm always interested in the choices and I'm not hearing that.
So as Karis mentioned earlier, the intersections are one of the priciest items in the project. We would not be able to fund them through local sources all at the same time. It would require several years of inclusion in a capital outlay program. And we get, one of the things to keep in mind is that we get economy of scale by including them all together rather than doing them one at a time. So that's one of the advantages of doing it through this program. In terms of the priorities, we did conduct a priority survey earlier in this process, and we are here tonight to collect information from you. So if your priorities differ from what was presented tonight, that's something we want to hear about. That's something that you can write down on the note cards and the post-its back there, and we will take that into the design and try to accommodate as much as we can. So this is the opportunity for those comments.
And I would just add to it, it is a negotiation process with the state. So there is some flexibility on certain items and there's some prioritization that we can put in place for certain areas. So if we think that parking is more valuable than 2 lanes of traffic in this particular area, that would be the priority. We do know that we have a residential corridor in this area that's sort of a little different than the rest of Highland Ave, which is much more commercial. So that also we may want to look at having a different treatment. So we do have the ability to apply for waivers in certain circumstances, but we also have to be very calculated about when we do that and where we do that. So getting feedback from everyone here will be helpful in helping inform how we approach that negotiation process.
Okay, everybody, we're going to go back to the tables there. Please, if you can, start at the table that corresponds with your ticket color, just so we got a good distribution there. Project team will be back to answer any questions, and we'll all hang around a little bit to field any off-the-cuff questions as well. Thank you all.
Don't talk utility about.
Yeah.
Just in the future, if they ever wanted to attend, people haven't construction.